The morning Giselle looked at the scrap car sitting on a rented trailer. She didn't just smile. She laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle, either. It was the sharp, echoing laugh of a CEO who had never been wrong, and was absolutely certain she wasn't starting now. She stood in the middle of the downtown automotive exhibition, wearing a tailored jacket that cost more than the rusted frame she was looking at. Beside her was a man in an oil-stained shirt, quietly tightening a bolt on a suspension system that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. Sitting on a folding chair next to him was his 5-year-old daughter, clutching a faded stuffed rabbit. Giselle ran a company that built million-dollar race vehicles. She had the best engineers money could buy, and she had absolutely no idea that the rusted, mismatched thing sitting in front of her was about to beat every single car she had ever produced across a $5 million finish line. If you've ever had someone look down on you, if you've ever been the underdog, hit that subscribe button. And before we go any further, I want you to make a promise to yourself. Go down to the comments right now and type this exact phrase: I will never back down for my family. Don't overthink it. Just type it. Let it be a declaration to the universe that no matter who laughs at you, you are going to protect yours. Wyatt was a man of routines. Every morning at 5:45, before his daughter Arya even stirred, he walked into the dark kitchen and put the water on. He always made 2 cups of coffee. He poured the first one for himself, and he set the second one on the corner of his workbench, right next to a photograph of a woman with dark hair, caught mid-laugh. He had been making that second cup for 2 years, ever since his wife Grace passed away. He never really explained it to anyone. He just kept doing it. He would stand at the kitchen window, holding his mug, looking out at the shape under the sun-bleached tarp in his backyard. Wyatt used to be a lead engineer for Vantech Motorsport. That was before a manager named Cameron noticed a design document Wyatt had been working on for 11 months. It was a thermal management system, built around natural convection instead of forced pump cooling. It was lighter, simpler, and practically immune to overheating. Wyatt submitted it through the proper channels. 6 weeks later, Cameron presented a slightly altered version to the board, with his own name on the cover. 2 months after that, Wyatt was called into a fluorescent-lit office and told his contract wasn't being renewed. Performance concerns, they said. Wyatt didn't yell. He didn't flip a desk. He just packed up his tools, drove home, and sat in his driveway for a long time. Grace had been alive back then. She came out to the driveway, leaned through the window, and just held his hand. She knew. Some losses don't need a speech. Wyatt didn't take any documents with him. Every line of that engine design lived in his head. And for 2 years after Grace died, that backyard became the place where all his quiet grief turned into steel, wire, and reclaimed parts. Arya grew up watching it happen. She knew which wrenches made the best clinking sounds. She named her stuffed rabbit Gravel. When Wyatt asked her why, she thought about it with that intense seriousness only a 5-year-old has, and said it was because gravel is always under the wheels. Nobody ever looks at it, but the wheels roll over it, and it flies really far. Wyatt had to stop working for a minute to just look at her. After she said that, building a race car from scratch on a mechanic's salary isn't just hard. It's a math problem that always ends in 0. Wyatt picked up extra shifts at a local repair shop. He stopped buying anything that wasn't strictly necessary. One afternoon, while they were eating discount mac and cheese on the porch, Arya looked at his grease-stained boots and asked, "Dad, are we poor?" Wyatt put his fork down. He looked at her and said, "No, kiddo, we're just being careful. If you know what that kind of sacrifice feels like. If you're grinding right now to build something out of nothing, for the people you love, go to the comments and type it again. I will never back down for my family. Let it be your prayer today. Speak it into existence." The Phoenix Desert Classic was an open-class endurance race. 200 kilometers of brutal desert terrain, no commercial restrictions, and a flat $5 million prize for the first car to cross the line. Wyatt knew the rules by heart. That's how he ended up at the exhibition hall, hoping to trade some of his engineering insight for spare parts from local suppliers. That's where Giselle and Cameron found him, after Giselle laughed and called his car a salvage yard project. Cameron lingered behind. He looked at Wyatt's chassis with a tight, uncomfortable expression. A week later, Cameron showed up unannounced at the repair shop where Wyatt worked. He walked in wearing a suit that didn't belong in a room smelling of motor oil. He didn't beat around the bush. He offered Wyatt $25,000 for the technical documentation of the cooling system, on the condition that Wyatt withdraw from the Phoenix Classic. Cameron presented it as a practical solution to make a poor man's problems go away. Wyatt wiped his hands on a rag. He didn't get angry. He just looked at Cameron for a long, heavy moment. Then he said, "You're standing in my shop, offering me 25 grand to tell you I can't win a race. One of us is wrong about something. You should probably figure out who it is." Cameron left without the documents. He sat in his luxury car in the parking lot for 10 minutes. Before he finally started the engine, the week before the race, Wyatt did a final flashlight inspection in his driveway. Fluid levels, tire pressure, suspension bolts. Arya came out in her pajamas, holding Gravel the rabbit, and sat on the front step. "Are you scared, Dad?" she asked. Wyatt looked up from the engine block. "Yeah, I am." "Why are you doing it, then?" Wyatt closed the hood. "Because your mom used to say, the only thing worse than losing is not starting. And I think she was right." Race day started at a blistering 105 degrees. The starting grid held 27 cars, lined up in the dust. Most of them were backed by corporate sponsors, wearing bright decals and surrounded by pit crews in matching technical gear. Cameron sat in pole position, inside V1. It was a carbon fiber masterpiece, tuned for pure speed and raw power. Way in the back, sitting alone in the outside lane, was a matte green chassis. It had a simple whiteboard, zip-tied to the passenger door. The whiteboard just said, G00. Up in the VIP observation deck, Giselle stood with her arms crossed. She had a clear view of the entire grid. She found that green car almost immediately, and she watched it, without saying a word to the executives standing around her, down in the general admission stands. Isaac sat next to Arya. She had her stuffed rabbit sitting on the metal railing so it could see the track. The green flag dropped, and the desert roared. Cameron pulled away with total authority. His car was built to dominate the early, flat stretches of the terrain. He drove with the absolute confidence of a man who had never been forced to doubt his machinery. By kilometer 40, Cameron was leading the pack by a wide margin. Wyatt was running all the way back in 9th place. He didn't panic. He didn't push the engine. His natural convection system wasn't designed to give him an advantage in the cool morning air. It was designed for what came next. By noon, the desert floor was baking at over 110 degrees. The road was literally throwing waves of heat back up into the undercarriages of the vehicles. Radiators started boiling over. High-end suspensions snapped on the jagged rocks hidden in the dust. Cameron's sophisticated dashboard lit up with a yellow thermal warning. His high-tech electronic cooling pump was fighting a losing battle against the sustained ambient heat. He had to reduce his speed by 15% just to keep the engine block from cracking. Wyatt didn't have a water pump. He didn't have electronic fail-safes or digital monitors. He just had a brilliant network of channels machined directly into the engine housing. The heat moved passively through the frame, dispersing naturally into the rushing air. His temperature gauge sat exactly where his kitchen table math said it would sit. He passed 2 cars that had pulled over with blown engines. Then, he passed 2 more. By kilometer 90, the digital timing boards updated across the camp. Giselle stared at the monitor in the VIP tent. Her arms dropped to her sides. G00 was in 3rd place. Then, 12 miles later, it moved into 2nd. Cameron got the desperate radio call from his crew chief. The engineer told him the green car was 4 seconds behind him and closing fast. Cameron slammed the accelerator to the floor. His engine temperature spiked immediately, flashing red across his visor. He was forced to back off. Then, they hit the canyon pass. The official race notes called it a single-vehicle corridor. It was narrow, jagged, and completely unforgiving. Cameron had to brake hard, to squeeze his wide, aerodynamic luxury build through the treacherous gap. He accepted the time loss as part of the race strategy. Wyatt didn't brake. 3 months earlier, he had driven his beat-up pickup truck out here on a Tuesday morning. He had walked that exact canyon pass, with a tape measure in his pocket. He knew exactly how many inches of clearance his custom frame possessed. He blasted through the narrow gap at a speed that defied basic logic. He came out the other side, 20 yards ahead of Cameron. The radio in Cameron's helmet went completely silent. His crew didn't say a word. Wyatt crossed the finish line. Exactly 17 seconds ahead of the Vantech flagship. There were no donuts in the dirt. There was no screaming on the radio or fist pumping out the window. Wyatt just parked the car in the staging area. He took off his helmet and stared up at the flat blue sky. Through the dusty windshield, he sat there for a long moment, letting the silence wash over him. Then, he opened the door and stepped out. Arya ducked under the security ropes. She ran across the staging area, as fast as her legs could carry her. She slammed into his knees, holding her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. She looked up at him and declared that Gravel had won the race. Wyatt picked her up, held her against his grease-stained shirt, and told her she was absolutely right. He took the $5 million check on the podium. He gave a brief, polite answer to the announcer, thanked Isaac, and packed up his tools. He didn't mention Cameron. He didn't mention the woman who had laughed at him in the exhibition hall. He just took his daughter to get ice cream in the warm evening air. But a local racing journalist named Hannah had been watching everything. She had received a thick manila folder from Isaac 2 weeks earlier. It contained time-stamped photos of Wyatt's original designs sitting on his kitchen table, right next to the patent Cameron had filed 6 months later. Hannah published the story the very next morning. She didn't accuse anyone directly in the text. She just put the 2 documents side by side and asked one simple question at the end of the article. She asked if the winner of the Phoenix Classic had always been racing on his own ideas. Cameron packed his luxury office. That same afternoon, he drove out of the Vantech parking lot and never came back. 3 weeks later, Wyatt was back at the local repair shop. He was wearing the same worn-out boots, replacing a busted transmission on a commuter sedan. The $5 million. It was sitting safely in a trust fund for Arya. A sleek black luxury SUV pulled into the gravel lot. Giselle got out. She walked into the open garage bay, completely alone. She brought no assistance, no PR team, and no arrogance. She walked straight up to his cluttered workbench and put a clean white envelope down. She said it was a formal contract. It wasn't a buyout offer, but a 50-50 co-ownership structure for the thermal technology. It had his name right next to hers, drafted by an independent attorney. Wyatt wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked at her. He didn't gloat. He didn't demand an apology. He just took a slow, accurate measure of the person standing in front of him. Arya walked out from the back room. She was holding Gravel the rabbit by one ear. She looked up at Giselle with that serious, unblinking stare that only kids possess. She asked if Giselle was the lady who laughed at her dad's car. Giselle stopped. She didn't brush the kid off. She crouched down until she was exactly eye level with the little girl. She looked Arya right in the eyes and said yes, she was. And she was incredibly sorry. Arya thought about that for a long time, turning the apology over in her mind. Then she held out her stuffed rabbit and said its name was Gravel, because Gravel is small and ignored, but it flies the farthest. Giselle took the rabbit gently in both hands. She looked at it closely and said that the person who named it must be incredibly smart. Wyatt watched them for a long moment. He saw the honesty in Giselle's posture. He walked over to the coffee pot that was still warm from the morning. He poured one cup and set it in its usual spot next to the photograph of Grace. He poured a second cup and brought it over to the workbench. He set it down on the wood in front of Giselle. For the first time in years, the noise and the anger were finally gone. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who is fighting a quiet battle today. I will never back down for my family.